The first time my mother ever asked me for help, she was 82 years old and dying in her kitchen. The last time my wife ever refused me anything, it cost her everything she thought she'd spend the rest of her life owning. That's not a coincidence. That's cause and effect. My name is Daniel Marsh. I'm 54 years old. I've been married for 12 years to a woman named Renee, and until last spring, I thought loyalty was something you built slowly, brick by brick, the way my father built the garage behind my mother's house with his own 2 hands. I was wrong. Loyalty isn't built. It's revealed. It shows up in the moment you don't expect it to be tested, and it either holds or it doesn't. Mine held. Hers didn't. Welcome to the story of the worst Tuesday of my life, and the Wednesday that changed everything after it. If you're the kind of person who believes actions have consequences, stick around, because this one delivers. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from tonight. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and let's get into it. Let me back up first, because you need to understand who my mother is before you understand what happened to her. Margaret Marsh raised me alone from the time I was 9 years old, after my father died in a warehouse accident that the insurance company spent 3 years arguing wasn't really their responsibility. She worked 2 jobs. She never remarried, not because nobody asked, but because she said she'd already found the only man she wanted, and when God took him, that was that. She sewed my Halloween costumes by hand. She sat through every single band recital I ever played, even the ones where I hit the wrong note so many times the music teacher stopped correcting me and just let me finish. She never once, not one single time in 54 years, called me to complain about her life. Not when her knees started going. Not when the arthritis got so bad she couldn't open jars. Not when my father's pension checks got smaller every year while the cost of everything else got bigger. She absorbed her own hardship quietly, like it was hers to carry and nobody else's, and she showed up for everyone else's hardship like it was the most important thing in the world. So when my mother called me on a Tuesday morning in March and told me something was wrong, I didn't think twice. I couldn't have. 54 years of that woman's love doesn't raise a son who thinks twice. The call. It was 6:51 in the morning. I remember the time because I was standing at the bathroom sink with a razor halfway across my jaw when my phone rang on the counter, and I saw her name on the screen, and something in my stomach dropped before I even answered, because my mother never called before 8. Never. She said it was rude to call people before they'd had their coffee, and she lived by that rule like it was scripture. Mom? Danny. Her voice was wrong. Thin, careful, like she was rationing the air she used to speak. I don't want you to worry, but I think something's wrong with me. My hand was already reaching for a towel to wipe the shaving cream off my face. What kind of wrong, Mom? My chest feels tight. Has for about 20 minutes now. And I'm a little dizzy when I stand up. Are you sitting down right now? I am. Stay sitting down. I'm coming, okay? Don't move. Danny, it's probably nothing. I don't want to be dramatic. Mom. Stay sitting down. I'm coming right now. I hung up and stood there for exactly 2 seconds, running through the math of my morning like a man defusing something. My car was at Delacroix Tire on Route 9, in for a brake job that wouldn't be finished until the afternoon. I dropped it off the night before and gotten a ride home from my coworker Phil. Which meant the only vehicle in my driveway that morning was Renee's black Lexus SUV, sitting there gleaming under the porch light like it always did, because Renee treated that car the way some people treat a family heirloom. Renee was in the kitchen already, dressed for work, standing at the island scrolling through her phone with a coffee mug in one hand. She barely looked up. I need to borrow the car, I said. My mom's not doing well. Chest tightness, dizziness. I need to get to her house right now. Renee didn't move for a second. Then she set her mug down slowly, deliberately, the way you set something down when you're buying time to figure out how to say no. Daniel, I have the Kessler presentation at 9. I need the car. I understand that, but this is my mother. She might be having a heart attack. Call an ambulance, then. She doesn't want an ambulance, she wants me. You know how she is. She'll refuse to even open the door for paramedics. She trusts me. Renee crossed her arms. I can't be late for this presentation. It's the biggest account of the quarter. You know that. I stood there in my own kitchen, feeling something in my chest go very still and very cold. Renee. My mother is 82 years old and she's telling me her arm is going numb. I need the car for maybe 2 hours. And this is the part one will remember until the day I die. She looked at me, not with panic, not with concern, not even with irritation exactly. She looked at me the way you look at a coworker who's asking you to cover a shift you don't want to cover. Mild inconvenience. Nothing more. Figure it out yourself, Daniel, she said. I have somewhere I need to be. She picked her mug back up and walked past me toward the garage door. Figure it out. I stood in that kitchen for maybe 4 full seconds after the garage door rolled shut and her taillights disappeared down the driveway. For seconds where I genuinely could not process what had just happened. 12 years of marriage. 12 years of anniversaries and holidays and every single Sunday dinner at my mother's table, and the first time I had ever asked Renee for something this urgent, this simple, this small in the grand scheme of a marriage. She looked at me and told me to figure it out myself. I didn't have time to sit with that feeling. I pulled out my phone. My mother lived 2 streets over from a man named Harold Briggs, a 68-year-old retired Army mechanic who'd known our family for almost 15 years. He mowed his own lawn in perfectly straight lines, waved at every car that passed his porch whether he knew the driver or not, and had been at my father's memorial service even though he'd only met my father a handful of times, because Harold believed showing up was simply what a decent man did. He drove a 15-year-old Ford pickup that ran like it had come off the lot yesterday because he babied it the way some men baby classic cars. He picked up on the second ring. Danny, what's going on? Harold, I need a huge favor. My mom's having chest pains, maybe worse. My car's in the shop and my wife just left with hers. Can you get her to Baptist Memorial? I'll meet you there. There was no hesitation. None. I'm already grabbing my keys. Give me 3 minutes. Harold, 3 minutes, Danny. I'll call you from the truck. That was it. No negotiation. No mention of his own morning plans, whatever they might have been. No calculation of inconvenience. Just 3 minutes, and then the sound of his truck door slamming through the phone speaker before he even hung up. I called my mother back immediately. Mom, listen to me. Harold's coming to get you right now. Just unlock the front door and sit in the chair by the window. Don't do anything else. I'm going to meet you at the hospital. Harold Briggs? Oh, Danny, I don't want to be a bother to that poor man. Mom. Sit down. I mean it. A small, breathless laugh came through the phone, the kind that told me she was scared even though she'd never say it out loud. Okay, baby. I called Phil, my coworker, and he swung back by within 10 minutes to run me over to Baptist Memorial, no questions asked, the same way Harold hadn't asked any. 2 men who barely knew each other, both dropping everything the second I said the word mother and chest pain in the same sentence, while my own wife had walked out the door over a sales presentation. I didn't examine that thought yet. I just let it sit there, cold and quiet, in the back of my mind, while I focused on getting to my mother. The hospital. Harold got her to Baptist Memorial 9 minutes after I called him. I know because I checked my phone the second I walked through those sliding glass doors and saw my mother sitting in a wheelchair in the emergency room lobby, her good gray cardigan buttoned all the way up, her purse in her lap like she was waiting for a bus rather than being triaged for a possible cardiac event. Mom. I dropped to a crouch in front of her wheelchair. Danny, I'm fine, really, I think I overreacted. You didn't overreact. I took her hand. It was cold, which scared me more than anything she'd said on the phone. Let the doctors decide that, okay? Harold stood a few feet back, hands in his jacket pockets, giving us space the way a good man does. I stood up and shook his hand, and words felt insufficient, but I said them anyway. Harold, I don't know how to thank you for this. He just shrugged like I'd asked him to help carrying groceries. That's what people do, Danny. Go take care of your mother. A nurse named Denise, mid-50s, sharp-eyed and efficient, got my mother back into a room within 20 minutes. The attending physician was a woman named Dr. Patricia Nguyen. Not how is she? Not let me know. Nothing. 2 hours, and the woman who had been tube convoiced, thorough, the kind of doctor who explained things twice without making you feel stupid for needing it once. We're going to run an EKG and check her cardiac enzymes, Dr. Nguyen told me in the hallway. Given her age and the symptoms she's describing, we're not taking any chances. I sat in that waiting room for 2 hours and 11 minutes. I know the exact number because I watched every single one of them tick by on the clock above the vending machine while I drank coffee so bad it tasted like punishment. My phone sat face up on my knee the entire time. Renee did not text once. UC for a 2-hour errand hadn't spared 30 seconds to ask if my mother was alive. At 11:20, Dr. Nguyen came to find me. Mr. Marsh, your mother experienced what we'd classify as a minor cardiac event, likely related to her blood pressure medication needing adjustment. It's not a full heart attack, but it's a clear warning sign we don't ignore at her age. We'd like to keep her overnight for observation. She's going to be okay? She's stable, and honestly, she's already asking the nurse whether the cafeteria has decent pie. I laughed, the kind of laugh that comes out half like a sob because the relief is so sudden and so total. That's her. I sat with my mother the rest of that afternoon. We watched a game show with the volume too low to actually hear the questions, and she guessed nearly every answer correctly anyway, because my mother has always been sharper than anyone gives her credit for. Around 3:30, she reached over and took my hand, and her voice changed. Steadier. More deliberate. Danny. Where was Renee today? I hesitated for exactly 1 beat too long, and my mother, who has never in her life missed anything, caught it immediately. She had a work presentation, I said carefully. My mother didn't gasp. Didn't raise her voice. She simply nodded once, slowly, and looked toward the window, where the afternoon light was falling gold and quiet across the parking lot outside. She didn't say another word about it. But I saw something shift across her face. Something that looked, unmistakably, like a decision being made. The morning after. I got home around 6 that evening. Renee was in the kitchen, still in her work blazer, scrolling through her phone with a glass of wine in front of her. She looked up when I walked in, her face doing this careful, practiced thing, like she was testing whether the temperature of the room required an apology or not. How's Margaret? Margaret. Not your mom. Not mom. Margaret, like she was referencing a coworker 3 cubicles over. She had a cardiac event, I said flatly. They're keeping her overnight. Oh no. I'm glad she's okay. A pause. The presentation went really well, by the way. Kessler signed. I stood there in my own kitchen and felt something in me go completely, permanently quiet. Not angry, not yet. Just quiet, the way a house goes quiet right before a storm arrives. I'm glad the presentation went well, I said, and I meant it as flatly as it sounded. Daniel, don't do that. Don't make me the villain here. I had an important meeting. You know how competitive my industry is right now. I asked you for 2 hours, Renee. My mother was telling me her arm was going numb, and you told me to figure it out myself. She set her wine glass down harder than she probably intended. I didn't know it was that serious. You didn't ask. She didn't have an answer for that. I went upstairs, packed a small overnight bag, and drove Renee's car back to the hospital that night, because at that point, I genuinely didn't care whether she needed it in the morning or not. I sat in a chair beside my mother's bed until visiting hours ended, and when the nurse gently told me I had to go, my mother squeezed my hand and said 4 words that I've thought about every single day since. You came. You always come. I kissed her forehead and drove home in silence, no radio, just the hum of the tires on the highway and the sound of my own thoughts finally catching up with everything I'd been avoiding for years. The decision. If you've been with me this far, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Stories like this one only reach the people who need to hear them. If you take 30 seconds to support the channel, drop a like, leave a comment telling me what you'd have done in my position, and let's keep going, because it's about to get interesting. My mother was discharged the following morning, Wednesday, a little after 10. I picked her up myself, having gotten a ride back to Delacroix Tire at dawn to finally collect my own truck. She walked out of Baptist Memorial under her own power, waving off the mandatory wheelchair escort at the very last second the way she always does, announcing to the entire nursing station that she'd had a cardiac event, not a personality replacement. I drove her home to the house on Winslow Court, the same house I grew up in, the same kitchen table where she'd helped me with algebra homework and iced birthday cakes and sat with me the week after my father's funeral without saying a single word because some things don't need words. I made her tea, checked her new prescriptions against the list Dr. Nguyen had given us, and sat with her while she drank it slowly, both hands wrapped around the mug like she was trying to hold on to its warmth a little longer than necessary. Then she set the mug down and looked at me with those clear, steady eyes that have never once, in 54 years, lied to me. "Danny, I want to call Arthur this morning." Arthur Whitfield. Her attorney of almost 20 years, the man who'd handled my father's estate and drawn up her will nearly a decade ago. "Mom, you don't have to do anything right now. You just got home." "I've been thinking about this since yesterday afternoon in that hospital bed," she said, cutting me off gently but completely. "I want to make some changes." I knew exactly what she meant, and I knew exactly why, and I didn't argue with her, because arguing with my mother when her mind is made up is like arguing with the tide. She dialed Arthur's office herself, her voice steady and composed even as she explained, briefly, that she'd had a health scare and wanted to update her documents as soon as possible. He agreed to come to the house that same afternoon. While we waited, she took my hand across the table the same way she had in the hospital. "I need you to understand something," she said. "What I'm about to do isn't about punishing anyone. It's about being honest about who shows up in this family and who doesn't. I've watched you make excuses for that woman for 12 years, Danny. I've never said anything because it wasn't my place. But yesterday wasn't the first time. It was just the loudest." She was right, and we both knew it. She reminded me, gently but without flinching, of Christmas 3 years earlier when Renee had left a family dinner early over a minor argument about seating. She reminded me of the time my mother had knee surgery and needed rides to physical therapy for 6 weeks, and Renee had found a reason to be busy for 5 of those 6 weeks. She reminded me of small moment after small moment, each one landing quietly like a stone dropped into still water, sinking slow and sure, until the pattern was undeniable. "I'm not angry," she said, and remarkably, she wasn't. Her voice was calm as a hand resting flat on a table. "I'm just finally being accurate." The lawyer. Arthur Whitfield arrived at 2 o'clock that afternoon in a gray suit, carrying a leather folder and the particular calm of a man who has drafted more wills than he can count and has long since stopped being surprised by what families decide to do with the things they built. He shook my hand, nodded at my mother with genuine warmth, and sat down at her kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen. I sat in the corner, quiet, present but not part of the conversation, because this decision belonged entirely to her. They spoke for nearly an hour. I won't repeat every detail here, because some things are private even in a story like this one, but I'll tell you the shape of it. The house on Winslow Court, paid off free and clear since 2011, the same house my father and mother built their whole life inside. The modest but carefully managed retirement accounts my father had spent 30 years contributing to before he died. My mother's jewelry, most of which had belonged to her own mother. A small trust she'd quietly built over the years and never once mentioned to anyone, earmarked in part for the local animal shelter where she'd volunteered every other Saturday for over a decade, because that's simply who she is. All of it, every single line, was redirected to me. Solely. Explicitly. Renee's name, which had appeared as a contingent beneficiary in the original document Arthur had drafted years earlier, was removed entirely, replaced with language so precise and so deliberate that there could be no confusion about my mother's intent. When Arthur finished, he clicked his pen closed, slid the documents into his folder, and looked at my mother with something like quiet admiration. Margaret, in 20-some years of practice, I've drafted a lot of these. Very few people make these decisions with this much clarity. I've had a lot of time to think about clarity, she said simply, and went back to the crossword puzzle she'd propped open beside her tea, as unbothered as if she'd just finished discussing the weather. Arthur shook my hand at the door on his way out. Your mother, he said quietly, glancing back at her, is one of the sharpest people I've ever worked with. I know, I said. I've always known. Going home. I left Winslow Court around 5 that evening and drove back to the house I shared with Renee, the truck's engine humming low beneath the sound of my own thoughts. My phone had been buzzing steadily in the cup holder for the last hour. Renee. 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 14 missed calls by the time I pulled into the driveway. I hadn't told her anything about the will. There was no reason to yet. But somewhere, somehow, whether Arthur's office had made a routine confirmation call to update contact records, or whether my mother had simply told her sister who had told someone else, word had clearly already started to travel, the way word about money always seems to. I walked inside and found Renee sitting on the edge of the couch, still in yesterday's clothes, both hands wrapped around her phone. She looked up the instant I opened the door, and her face had changed completely from the careful composure of the night before. This was something raw. Something that looked, for the first time in a long time, like real fear. Daniel. I've been calling you all day. I know, I said, hanging my keys on the hook by the door. Is it true? About the will? Arthur's office called me. They said I've been removed as a beneficiary. Daniel, please tell me that's some kind of mistake. I looked at her for a long moment, and I thought about the plastic chair in that hospital waiting room, about Harold's truck pulling into his driveway in under 3 minutes flat, about my mother's cold hand and her steady voice saying, "You came, you always come." It's not a mistake, I said. My mother made her own decision, the same way you made yours on Tuesday morning. Daniel, that's not fair. I had one important meeting. You told me to figure it out myself, I said, and my voice didn't rise, because it didn't need to. While I was standing in our kitchen telling you my 82-year-old mother's arm was going numb, you picked up your coffee and walked out the door for a sales meeting. Harold Briggs, a man who barely knows us, got her to the hospital in 9 minutes because that's what decent people do. You didn't even send a text asking if she survived. Renee's face went pale, the color draining slowly, the way water drains from a glass tipped too far. I didn't realize it was that serious. You didn't ask, I said again, quieter this time. You never asked. Please, talk to her. Ask her to reconsider. I'll apologize, I'll explain, You'll what, Renee? Explain that a client presentation mattered more than a woman's heart attack? She's not going to reconsider. And honestly, I wouldn't ask her to, even if she would. The living room went completely silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator down the hall. Renee looked at me, really looked, the way you look at someone when you finally understand you've lost something you can't get back. What does this mean for us? She asked quietly. And I told her the truth, the same clarity my mother had handed to me the day before, passed forward like something inherited. It means I spent 12 years thinking loyalty was something you built slowly. Turns out it's something that shows up the second it's actually tested, or it doesn't show up at all. Yours didn't. What came after? I didn't sleep in that house that night. I drove back to Winslow Court, sat in my mother's kitchen, and told her everything, all of it, and she listened the way she always listens, without judgment, without saying "I told you so," even though she absolutely could have. I'm not doing this to punish anyone, she reminded me again, echoing what she'd said the morning before. I'm doing this because I finally decided to be honest about who shows up. What you do with that honesty is your own business, Danny. In the weeks that followed, Renee and I separated, and eventually the divorce became final without much of a fight, because there wasn't much left to fight over once the truth of that Tuesday morning had been said out loud between us. She kept her car, her career, her carefully guarded independence. I kept my mother's trust, in every sense of that word, and something I hadn't realized I'd been missing for years, the simple, uncomplicated relief of not making excuses for someone anymore. Harold Briggs still waves at me from his porch every time I drive past, and I still stop sometimes to sit with him for a while, because a man who shows up in 9 minutes flat for a woman he isn't even related to deserves more than a wave in passing. My mother is doing well, her medication adjusted, her crossword puzzles as sharp as ever, her Saturday mornings at the animal shelter uninterrupted. And me? I learned something that Tuesday morning that I don't think I could have learned any other way. Love isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with declarations or anniversaries or 12 years of routine. It shows up quietly, in the moment you least expect to need it, and it either holds the weight you put on it, or it doesn't. My mother's love held. Harold's love, in its own quiet way, held. My marriage did not. Some people spend their entire lives making withdrawals from relationships they never once deposited into. Renee had been overdrawn for years. I just hadn't been checking the balance. If this story meant something to you, I'd genuinely appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button and left a comment below telling me what you would have done in my shoes. These stories only find the people who need them when you take a moment to share them. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next one.